Good morning, everybody, and welcome to On the Record, the ongoing series of fireside chats sponsored by the Pat Brown Institute for Public Affairs at Cal State Los Angeles. Glad to have you all with us today. For those who are unfamiliar with the Pat Brown Institute, we are an organization at Cal State LA dedicated to strengthening and promoting and defending democracy. And one of the ways we do that is put on candidate forums and have events like this to give people an opportunity to hear in a more long-form manner the thoughts, the opinions, the viewpoints, the way that candidates and public leaders think. So we'll be discussing, in addition to the issues facing candidates in the mayor's race, we'll be discussing sort of the nature of public leadership and of decision-making, as we have with the previous candidates. In previous fireside chats, we have sat down with Mayor Bass last fall, and in recent weeks we have had mayoral candidates Ray Wong and Adam Miller, and today we are very glad to have Councilwoman Nithya Raman with us. Before we start, just a couple sort of announcements and disclaimers. We are recording this. This will be shared on YouTube, and this will also be, the audio will be repurposed as an episode of the What's Next Los Angeles podcast. So this will be out in various different forms. I also want to do a sort of disclaimer about partisanship. The Pat Brown Institute is by charter a nonpartisan organization and makes no endorsements. In fact, we are likely to be holding a mayoral forum ourselves. And for full disclosure, I have a relationship of some nature with 4 of the 5 candidates for mayor. I had the pleasure of serving for 2 years with Councilwoman Raman on the City Council. We worked together very closely on a lot of stuff, and we have remained friends, and I supported her last re-election. I have known Karen Bass for close to 30 years and endorsed her for mayor 4 years ago. I have done coalition work with Reverend Ray and Adam Miller. Founded a nonprofit that my husband runs. So Spencer Pratt is the only one I've never met. So when I talk to people here today, I talk with people who are friends, and I talk with people that I respect a lot for their contributions to Los Angeles. So welcome.
Thank you.
Good to see you. And we actually had a warm-up on this before I started. They did a VIP reception for the Pat Brown Institute,
yeah.
And unbeknownst to me, when I took the job, they had arranged for Nithya to be the guest speaker. So we actually did a bit of a fireside chat then last April. So it's been almost a year.
Yes.
So we're going to get to some issues, but let me start with some questions about public leadership first, and let me dive right in. LA is in a moment of serious overlapping crisis. We've got a housing crisis, a homelessness crisis. We've got public safety issues. We've got a serious hole in the city budget. We got the Olympics coming. We've got immigration raids. You have been on the inside. You have worked with this mayor. What is lacking in LA's leadership, and what equips you to provide what's lacking?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for organizing these. I think this is a great opportunity for us to engage on questions in a longer format way, in a way that allows, I think, for people to really engage with candidates, which you weirdly don't always get. So I want to thank you for providing that space. You know, I stepped into this race last minute and somewhat unexpectedly, even for myself. And I stepped into it because I had a feeling about leadership at City Hall that I don't think I was alone in feeling. In City Hall, I felt a rudderlessness in response to our current crises, and they are crises. We have a housing crisis, an affordability crisis that is driving people out of the city. We have a homelessness crisis that we are making incremental progress on at extraordinary cost. We have major events coming up for which I feel unprepared. We have ice on our streets. We had the fires, and we have the continuing fallout from that. We are in a very, very tough moment in LA. And I've been in City Hall now for a little over 5 years. And especially over the last couple of years, but especially last year, I did feel a real sense that rather than making progress on addressing these crises, rather than leading with urgency on addressing these issues, rather than confronting the real challenges that we have in actually taking steps towards addressing these issues, and they always produce conflict. There's always going to be conflict when you're taking steps to address big issues in LA. I felt like we were facing a sense of stasis and maybe even falling backwards. And that we were telling the public that we were going to take on big issues around affordability and around our homelessness crisis, while also telling them we couldn't fix their streetlights for a year, that we couldn't fix potholes, that we couldn't address some of the most essential infrastructure in LA. And it felt increasingly untenable for me as a council member to go out to my community and to say that to people. And I did feel like a lot of the conditions that we were in were created by a lack of leadership in City Hall. So what would I bring to that moment? I think I've demonstrated over my time in office a willingness to stand up for what I think needs to be done, even when there's real public conflict around it. Both support and pushback, because that is what emerges from almost every issue. But you have to be willing to stand up and take steps forward that may engender pushback. And I didn't see that happening enough in this environment. And I think that is what's needed right now on our housing crisis, for example. We have an affordability crisis that is driven by a lack of housing. In LA, we have, I believe we are the city that has the dubious distinction of having the fewest homes per adult of any major city. And as a result of that, we are the most rent-burdened city. And yet, when we try and push forward on housing, even when we put plans in place, immediately our city has actually walked back those plans, gone to court to stop affordable housing, gone to the state to try and stop new bills that would bring more density here, instead of actually grappling with the issue ahead of us, which is that we need to build a lot more housing. So let's talk to Angelenos about where that housing should go and how it should be built. I want to do that work. I want to step into this moment with a vision for how we resolve some of these big issues, whether it's our housing crisis, whether it's getting around our streets more safely, whether it's preparing for the Olympics, and to actually grapple with Angelenos on their vision of how we respond to that, and to really get into the kind of the realities of implementing changes in a way that lifts up this city.
So you got elected in 2020.
Yes.
You ran an unprecedented insurgent campaign. You sort of rocked the political establishment. It was big news. I went back and I looked at sort of your comments on your victory, and you said that you took it to be a mandate for systemic change. Now that you've been there for 5-6 years, what did you most underestimate about the constraints of governing, and how has working in city government changed your view of government, what government can realistically accomplish?
That's a great question. I want to say that I ran on a premise that for a long time in LA, elections had happened in very narrow spaces. Had basically been a conversation that was being had by a very small percentage of LA's population. And I ran in the first election where our federal elections and our local elections overlapped. And so I knew people would be at the polls. This was the first getting Trump out election. And so people were gonna be at the polls voting against Trump, proudly. And I knew that they would be out there. And so I wanted to talk to them and tell them, hey, there's another election on your ballot that matters for you. So if you can just look down your ballot and make a vote on it, that things could change in the city for you. And a lot of those voices were voices that had historically never voted in municipal elections before. Renters, younger people, people of color. Historically, elections that were off-cycle elections, homeowners voted, a less diverse collection of voters participated in those elections than were actually representative of LA, and I think we saw what happened in City Hall as a result. I think the elected officials in LA didn't represent LA as well. And so we went out and we knocked on doors in apartments. We knocked on doors that had never been knocked on before for a local election. They'd never seen a local politician come. They didn't know who their council member was or what a city council did. And we said to them, your city can do more for you. And I'm really excited that that premise we were able to actually follow up on. You and I did some of this work together. It's very, very exciting work. I'm excited that I was able to get into office in a city where landlords have historically had a significant amount of power, and to actually expand significantly protections for renters across the city. We passed the largest expansion of tenant protections in 40 years in the city. We provided universal just cause eviction protections to renters, the largest city in America to do that. We were actually able to lower allowable rent increases in rent-stabilized units, lowering rent increases for over 1 million Angelenos. Over 1 million Angelenos. I mean, we were able to deliver on at least some of the promise that I had made to residents when I had first run, and said we can do big things using the powers of the city. But I will say that there are real challenges to being able to deliver on results. And I think some of those challenges are what we are seeing right now in LA. And part of those have to do with the bureaucracy in the city. And as much as we have a powerful city council, how slow those departments are to actually respond to the demands and the requests for change from the city council. So, for example, I put forward a number of efforts to try and improve homelessness response in the city, to increase coordination, to make sure that we are staffed up for what is about to be another crisis. Parallel to our homelessness crisis on the streets, there's also going to be an institutional crisis as LASA potentially falls apart and we lose federal funds and we have potentially thousands of people who will no longer have their homes anymore. We don't have the staff in the city to actually be able to respond to this. So I put forward motions to centralize homelessness response, to create a Bureau of Homelessness Oversight, to staff up and plan for this transition in a way that really makes sense for LA. And a year after we've done that, we still don't have a single person hired for that new bureau, not one. A year after we put that forward. And on that issue, this is one of many changes that we've asked for which the bureaucracy has simply not moved. On housing construction and changing development services and how you build more quickly, the same thing. We put forward motions asking DWP to transform how they do business in the city on housing. A year after we've done it, we've gotten our first report back, and it is a mild take, to say the least, right? Yeah. And so I think this is the thing that we struggle with in the city, is that I think there is an ambitious agenda that a lot of people come in with, and then they meet up against the limitations of the bureaucracy and the lack of power that individual council members have to actually push that bureaucracy to change. That is a power, however, that the mayor has. The mayor runs the departments. The mayor appoints the general managers. The mayor can say, these are your 4 or 5 priorities. This is what I will hold you accountable to. And this is what I'm going to demand changes. And if it doesn't change, I will change the leadership.
So a lot of times candidates, particularly candidates with a lot of grassroots energy behind them, they get elected and voters are expecting really big, sweeping change. And then voters get frustrated when change is slower and more incremental than they expect. A lot of voters feel like, man, candidates just give us this bait and switch, right? Obama campaigned on big change, and then his first speech after he got elected was, well, this is going to be hard and it's going to take a long time. So let's try to see if we can level set for voters a little bit. You get elected, you've described what the environment is like, all the crises going on. Where do you think you can realistically do big change versus where do you think the progress will be incremental?
I think on some of the issues So I want to acknowledge the moment that we're in right now, right? Because we are in a budget crisis that is largely self-made in the city, frankly, made by decisions pushed and supported by this mayor that have put us in a situation where services have been cut to the bone, where department staffing has been cut to the bone, where the ability of the city to respond on any issue, whether it be the most complex or the most straightforward, has really been diminished. We also are up against some very big public moments. The Olympics coming up, which will demand that the city make changes in certain kinds of infrastructure investments that will also pull us in a direction that is mandatory.
Right.
We don't have a lot of room to move, right? So we have a budget situation, which is really limited. We have staffing in departments, which is really limited. And then we have big events that will mandate that we need to be moving in ways that will limit our ability to do other things. So I do think that there is going to have to be a real level setting as we go into this moment to say we are at a moment of rebuilding, that we are at a moment of trying to deliver on our promises and to really deliver on them. And I think a lot of what we need to do is actually can be done with our existing system, within our existing system. So I think there's real limitations in what we will be able to do, and I don't think I have to. If I'm not going to wait till after I'm elected to say that to people. I'm not going to wait till the first speech after, to say to people that we are moving forward at a time of real challenge. At the same time, I do think that there's ways in which the city can show up for people that can be transformative and that don't require additional resources. On housing, which I talk about all the time, and housing costs, getting the city out of the way doesn't require departmental resources, it requires commitment and stepping forward. And I think those changes can be made. I think changing the way, right now we have a huge, crisis of trust with LAPD, how they're responding to protests, how they're responding to the ICE raids, how we're talking about trust in the community. I think making some of those changes is not going to require more resources. It is going to require a push in culture and accountability. And I think that there's a big change to be made in our homelessness response, which will require some more resources, but will actually require significantly more effort to use our existing resources with greater oversight, with greater accountability, that can actually deliver on better outcomes on the street.
When you ran the first time, you ran really without any institutional backing at all. It was a totally outsider campaign. You got more votes than anybody ever has for city council, a record that still holds. You get into office, and instead of embracing you, the establishment attacked you. Right? We heard on the Fed tapes they were targeting you, and they put your district in a blender. You got, half a new district for your reelect. You're now running for mayor, and the establishment has reacted somewhat similarly. There have been some pretty harsh criticisms accusing you of being Benedict Arnold or Judas Iscariot or all sorts of stuff. If you get in, are you going to need those forces to help you govern, and how are you going to build those relationships?
I look back to my track record in City Hall over the last 5 years. I didn't run with a lot of establishment support. I didn't have any endorsements from local elected officials when I first ran for office. And yet I worked with those same elected officials to push forward an ambitious agenda when I got there. I've built unlikely alliances on the council. I have, really focused so heavily on how we deliver on practical positive change for residents, and really trying to go out to council members and making the case for those practical changes. Whatever your political affiliation is, whatever your ideological kind of affiliation is, I've really tried and succeeded in pushing forward, some of the things that I really felt were absolutely important for the city to do. I built those relationships over time. I built those relationships carefully, and I can, I know I can, even if the establishment is right now saying, being critical, I do think that, I do think that those relationships can be rebuilt and can be worked on. I also do want to say that I go through this work, I try to at least. I try to go through this work with a lot of humility. And with a lot of respect for the knowledge and the perspectives that my colleagues and the public bring to the table. And I think that humility does go a long way in trying to address people's concerns about changes that are needed, in trying to make sure that we can bring communities along in addressing issues. And I think that humility will serve me well as I go back to all of the parts of the local political establishment, and to say, if I do win, I'm here, but I can't do any of this without you. We can't serve the people of Los Angeles without you. And what can I do to earn your trust? What can I do to work with you?
In the last election cycle, you were a leading advocate for Measure ULA. You campaigned for it, you did phone banks. A couple months ago, you proposed going to the ballot to reform Measure ULA. You've gotten a lot of pushback from people who were your base, people who are big ULA defenders. Talk about that, but the question I want to ask about it is, how do you balance the expectations of supporters who don't want you to compromise on something?
Yeah. Well, let me talk about ULA first, and then I can talk about the harder question. So on ULA, I did campaign for it. I endorsed it. I ran phone banks. I was really excited about it, and I'm still really excited about it. It has given us funding for affordable housing construction that the city has not had at this scale. It has given us funding for eviction defense in a way that is sustainable, that we had during the pandemic. We saw how useful that was for residents, and now we have it again. We have funding for rent relief for the most vulnerable tenants, and it's an incredible resource. It is an incredible resource, and I think one that we should be fighting to preserve. I do think that there were two issues with ULA that I was hoping to address with my efforts on reform. One was that there were real threats being posed to ULA from legislative efforts in Sacramento, from people who were worried about its impact on multifamily construction, and a hostile ballot measure from the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association that wouldn't have just eliminated ULA, but would have eliminated all transfer taxes across the entire state. And I saw those as real threats to ULA, potentially taking away this source of funding entirely from the city of Los Angeles. And I thought, and I still do think, that thoughtful reform to ensure that ULA is still getting taxes from mansions. It was billed as a mansion tax from single-family home sales that meet the criteria, while exempting newer multifamily construction would have gotten us to a place where people were not funding the ballot measure, the very hostile ballot measure, and would have actually defanged some of the legislative work in Sacramento. I also do care about multifamily housing construction. I care about it deeply. I don't think we can rely exclusively on public funds to be able to address our affordable housing crisis here in LA. The vast majority of residents live in market-produced housing. They live in housing that is not deed-restricted affordable housing. They live in housing produced by the private real estate market. And a lot of it is, a lot of the new housing is unaffordable to them, but a lot of that housing is affordable to them. And I think we need to be building more. We need to incentivize and push the private real estate market to build more in order to lower costs in LA. I think that's the only way that we'll be able to meet our incredible housing shortage, which the state has identified to be something like 500,000 units. We're not going to build, the city cannot build that much. And so I wanted to also make a change to ULA to to basically remove what I thought was an unintended consequence, that the tax actually limited new multifamily housing production in the city. Now, I saw that in the data, I was convinced by the data, and I wanted to make an exemption. I engaged with groups that had been part of the ULA coalition for many, many months in advance of that. I engaged with our labor partners who had been part of that discussion, who funded the effort to get ULA on the ballot initially. And I engaged with affordable housing developers and market rate housing developers to understand how those changes could be made. And I think people assessed those risks differently than I did.
Yep.
And people assessed the importance of multifamily housing construction in the city differently from the way that I did. And so ultimately, I wasn't able to come to a resolution that everyone could stand behind.
Right.
But I did think that the conversation was important to have. And so that's why I put forward that motion. And I know it surprised a lot of people. But that conversation is now continuing. They've established an ad hoc committee on ULA reform at the city council. And I think a lot more people are going to be engaged in having a very kind of good faith version of that conversation going forward. And yeah, go ahead.
You know, I always thank you for that. I always struggled with trying to balance the sort of expectations of supporters who didn't want compromise.
Yeah. Whether
it's on that issue or any other. Like, how do you try to navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to me, I think the only way that you can do it is by engagement. So I did engage. I engaged deeply with the ULA coalition to try and move forward a discussion on that. Ultimately, we didn't come to an agreement, but I engaged deeply. I also think that you do it by being honest about where you're coming from and what your values are, right? What are you seeing that is going wrong? What do constituents expect for you to deliver in LA that this problem is preventing you from delivering? And really being open and honest about the trade-offs of that moment. But I don't think that there's an easy way around disappointing people who are part of your coalition. And I think you've experienced that.
Damn right.
Many a time. From a very broad coalition that you had brought together, who felt disappointed, I think, from both
either direction.
From either direction of the political spectrum. I think that's part of the job, right? And ultimately, I am deeply practical. I'm an urban planner by training. I love this city. I want it to function. I look to the data. I look to kind of research to understand the impacts of policies. I look to my constituents to learn from them on how things are feeling and how these policies are playing out in my community. And then I advocate for change if needed. And I think there's always going to be pushback, and I think you just have to be able to stand up and say, we may not agree this time, but I am being transparent and honest with you about how I've made this decision, and I hope that we can come to an agreement the next time.
One of the areas where you have drawn big distinction with the mayor is on housing. The mayor has stalled, perhaps killed, I think stalled, but we'll see, already approved affordable housing in my old district. She revised her Executive Directive 1 in the face of pushback from homeowners associations to limit where affordable housing could be done. She opposed SB 79 because she didn't want housing in certain places. In a Raman administration, who gets to say no to housing?
Oh, that's interesting. Who gets to say no to housing? Well, let me take a step back and just say how we say yes to housing and how that would look different from the way that it looks right now.
Good pivot.
Well, no, I'll answer your question. Right now, the way we plan for housing is that we are very haphazard about it. We have a bunch of community plans that are mostly a decade or more late. We have a process through which we are dealing with state mandates that then tweak our existing community plans in ways that are completely unpredictable for constituents and cause real anger, frustration, dismay when new projects pop up that they didn't expect to see coming. And we have construction that's happening in ways that I think are, for lack of a better word, just not that pretty. Not kind of creating inviting neighborhood spaces that feel human scale and that feel kind of disjointed, right? It is an unsettling planning moment.
Yeah.
And I think we need to turn that around. I think we need to think about not just updating community plans one by one, and by the time we're finished updating all of them, the updated ones will already be 10 years late. I think we need to be thinking about really updating our citywide general plan. I think we need to be updating it with principles that bring about the kind of density that the state is mandating that we produce, but that we've actually never created the environment to produce, right? So let's do it before they ask us to do it. That way we are actually standing up and defining what it means to be a LA that invites and accommodates more people rather than letting the state do it for us. I think we can do it in ways that ensure that these plans are predictable, that we use visualization software to show neighborhoods what their neighborhoods will look like so that there's no surprises, and that we're including principles that generate beautiful communities. Communities that are walkable, communities that feel like they're at the same height. Like that is very calming, that is very beautiful. You think of European cities. We can, and the beauty of some of those cities, they're all the same height. They're very dense, but they're all the same height. And so I think having those kind of aesthetic principles in place can really generate a lot of buy-in for what a neighborhood could look like. And if we actually put that plan together and do it quickly, we can tell the state, stop interfering, because we've already done what you've asked us to do, right? We've already done it. We've never tried to do that here. But it is totally possible with the tools that we have to do that. And once we figured out how we say yes to housing, and that it's a plan that people know what's going to happen, people understand how it's going to play out, then we stop trying to say no to the housing that comes up in these plans. And that means reducing and limiting our incredibly unpredictable and expensive appeals process, making sure that our departments are providing permits within a timely fashion. 60 days for zone compliant projects, 120 days for something that requires discretion, making sure DWP doesn't show up a year into your construction or after the building's already been constructed and saying, oh, you have to put in a new transformer and pay $7 million. I think we basically create a system where we know what we want, and then we build what we want.
I want to ask about homelessness. I am old enough to remember when the conversation about homelessness about a decade ago was about how to get to functional zero, like how to eliminate homelessness.
I was at the CAO then.
Yeah, you were,
we were talking about that.
We were talking about how do we do what Salt Lake City did, and that's not a conversation we have right now. When the mayor came into office, her two big things on homelessness were declaring a state of emergency and launching the Inside Safe program, which has resulted in small reductions in street homelessness at an incredible cost. Are there any solutions that are scalable to the scope of the crisis we're facing? And how long do you think it'll take before we can get back to a discussion about functional zero?
Oh, yeah. I also, I want to underscore that even when we were having those conversations about functional zero, I think there were tens of thousands of people who were experiencing homelessness in LA. The difference was that most of those people were in a small number of neighborhoods, just in Skid Row, a few in Hollywood, and at the beaches. Yeah, and so for the rest of the city, that conversation didn't seem so preposterous.
Yeah.
But I think if you were in those neighborhoods, it would have been a harder conversation to have. Like, how do we actually come up with a response that meets the scale of the crisis that we have, right? I actually think that we have a lot more resources now that is approaching the scale of what we need in order to meet the crisis on our streets. And I don't want to divorce the question of housing production from the conversation around homelessness. I think if we don't have more housing, we will never solve homelessness. Homelessness is driven by a lack of housing.
Yeah.
It is easier to get people indoors when they're already on the streets, when there is more housing. But I think we could be doing things very differently from the way that we're doing it right now. Changes that I've been pushing for at City Hall and haven't seen happen. So one is that we are now investing through Inside Safe in an incredibly expensive intervention that we've tried to make more economical. The council has tried, I have tried to make more economical, but we've seen very little progress on it. On average, the cost of a motel room under the Inside Safe program is $85,000 a year.
Wow. And
there are some motel rooms that are $100,000 a year as an intervention. To me, that is not a sustainable response to our crisis on the streets. But I believe in a big response to our crisis on the streets. And the way that we do it is by increasing shelter and by making our existing shelter work better. So there are interventions that you can make that are including things like time-limited subsidy programs, which are short-term rental vouchers that allow an individual to access an apartment and intensive case management services at a third of the cost of what we're paying for a motel room. There are interventions like shared housing, which are even cheaper than that, and by the way, both of these have great outcomes. They actually lead to people getting housed and staying housed more than Inside Safe and more than many of our existing shelters. And so I would really be focusing on that, taking the money that we are using right now to fund a range of shelter interventions, looking across them to see how they're functioning, and investing in the best ones and moving our interventions towards lower cost but extremely impactful interventions that preserve the dignity and privacy of people who are living on the streets and gives them a compassionate and appropriate situation for them to move back into self-sustainability. I would also say that we need to be using data better. I've really pushed for and have created the first real performance data that we have on our homelessness system. And we did that in using data from HMIS. And we looked across our shelter system, we looked across our outreach, we looked at permanent supportive housing, and we looked at how each of these investments was performing. And now we can see how long are people staying in shelters. Is every shelter bed filled? And if it's not, let's fill it. Is every permanent supportive housing unit filled? If not, let's fill it. And we're actually using that data already at the city through a grant that I got, where we're working with this consulting team that is not just generating that data and analyzing it every month, but actually using that data to push for better outcomes in our homeless services system. This is exactly the work that I was trying to enshrine in the city in the Bureau of Homelessness Oversight, which still doesn't have a single staff, right? But if you move towards lower cost interventions that expand significantly the available shelter that we have, and then use that data to actually better manage our shelter system, we can actually get large numbers of people off the streets much more effectively. And the reality is that when you have shelter, people go indoors. We know that across the board, but we need to have more of it, and we need to have an opportunity for people to come indoors quickly and regularly.
I want to ask about the city budget. We've referenced it. You've made a big issue out of restoration of city services. The thing you talked about at the beginning of your campaign, at the beginning of this conversation, was how long it takes to get a street light repaired.
Right.
The city is in, it's a world of hurt financially. Matt Szabo, the city's budget guru, gave a presentation a week or two ago that said the next budget year, the mayor proposes her next budget next month, or this month, now that we're in April, is not going to be a year of restoration of services.
Right.
If you get elected in December, you have to propose your first budget 5 or 6 months later. We've all seen sort of the graphs and charts that Kenneth Mejia has published about that visualize how the city has spent its money. Your first budget, how different will the graphs and charts look, would you say?
Well, as you know, a lot of those are locked in. A lot of those expenditures are locked in, right? And so I think that is the reality of the situation that we're facing. The biggest expenditure in the city is personnel. And personnel costs are driven by staffing numbers and by contracts. And, I talked about my challenges with for example, the police contract that was signed in 2023, I believe, which increased salaries significantly and led to us having hundreds of millions of dollars less in our budget that we then had to grapple with, which then had kind of knock-on impacts across all of our personnel costs in the city. And I think we are still going to be grappling with those contracts and the impacts of those contracts on our budget. So I think one of the realities of this moment is that the next budget will be a tough budget, no matter who is the mayor.
Yeah.
I think the promise of the future is that we are not making what I felt were politically motivated decisions around budgeting, that we're actually budgeting for what Angelenos need. I think I was really disappointed that after last year's $1 billion budget deficit budget, where we barely avoided 1,600 layoffs, a few months later we then ended up investing in a convention center expansion, which is going to cost us $6 billion over the next 30 years with debt service, and will take a huge chunk from our general fund every year as well, and will leave us less capable of being able to manage some of these costs. We will have to grapple with liability reform, and I think that's something that's going to be really important, but cannot happen overnight. Yep. But I do think that someone who is really focused on trying to figure out how we actually budget for the needs, including putting into place a real capital improvement plan, and identifying what are our infrastructure needs and costs before we budget, so that we can make our contracting decisions and our budgeting decisions being aware of what investments are needed in the city of Los Angeles to maintain our roads, to maintain our streets, to maintain our infrastructure, I think can have a transformative impact over time. And I think it will depend on our next contract negotiation. It will depend on our liabilities and how we're able to manage them. But I do think that the promise is not immediate change. The promise is change that will come over the next few years.
Public safety.
Yeah.
When you took office, you were critical of LAPD and police spending. You called for making LAPD a much smaller, specialized force and investing more heavily in housing, mental health care prevention. In office, you've pushed for a lot of those investments, and as you said, you voted against police raises. Some of your critics on the left have been frustrated that you voted for overall city budgets that increased police spending, and that you said you don't want the size of LAPD to shrink any further than where it is now. Would you say that your thinking on public safety has evolved since you've taken office? And if so, what influenced that?
I think, I do want to point out that the LAPD is actually much smaller than it was when I first started. But we are spending more on it because of these contracts that I voted against. We actually are spending, I believe, something like $500 million more today on 1,500 fewer officers than we had just a few years ago.
Say that one again.
$500 million more a year for 1,500 fewer officers, right? And that's in large part due to the contract that I voted against. So in many ways, I think I've tried to grapple with the impacts of that, but we are in a very, I think that contract vote has made it harder to change the bar charts. Yeah,
sure.
Right? But I would say, yes, my thinking has evolved to some extent in in the sense that I think we need to build out a system of public safety that really answers residents' needs. And I think that if we don't do that, we put in peril a lot of the work that we want to do at City Hall. I think we absolutely need to be able to build out a system that when people call 911, that someone picks up the phone. And by the way, we're not hiring 911 call takers because we don't have the budget to do that, right? So our public safety related spending has actually made it less possible for us to deliver on public safety outcomes like speedy 911 call pickup. And I think we need to build out a system that when you need armed officers to show up, that they're able to show up. And when you need someone else to come, when you need an unarmed crisis, a mental health crisis worker to show up, that we build out that system as well. But our budget has made it impossible for us to do that as well. I know that the pilots that we've put together where we're actually building out unarmed crisis response, emergency homelessness response, like through the Circle program, that these have been really successful, that they've answered calls for service that don't require armed response, that they've actually taken call load off of LAPD, that they've been actually able to respond to calls quickly within 30 minutes on average of when the calls are coming in, and that they've worked, that the vast majority of those calls for service have been addressed by those unarmed workers. But we still, now it's 2026, 6 years after the city committed to reimagining public safety, before I even got elected, we still do not have a citywide unarmed response system because we've just failed to make the investments. And so we don't have an alternative way to respond to most calls for service from 911. And so to me, my vision of public safety here is how do we make sure that we create a system that really works? What is it going to take to resource that system fully? What is it going to take to make sure that we have a citywide unarmed crisis response system that is able to answer calls? And what is it going to take to be able to make sure that when armed officers are needed, that they are able to respond in a timely fashion? What does deployment look like? How are they set up and how are they actually responding to calls? I think we still have not done that work as a city, and that's work I'm committed to doing if I'm mayor.
A minute ago, to go back to something you said, you mentioned the police response to protests. The other day, there was footage again of that horrified some people about how LAPD responded to some of the No King's Day protests, people being knocked down, people being roughed up. That has been sort of a recurring criticism of LAPD. I mean, since 2020, but even before then, right? It's been a recurring thing. Any reflections you want to make on that? And related to that, does Chief McDonald get a second term? So
I would say on protest response, I have been very disappointed by LAPD's kind of inability to keep people safe who are exercising their First Amendment rights peacefully. It's been disappointing to see it happen over and over again at protest after protest. And I know that there are ways in which they can do better. The council has put forward multiple pathways through which other cities have responded to protests, including having kind of tiers of escalation, right? And protocols to respond to protests that start with kind of not people in riot gear.
Right.
That other cities have successfully put in place that we can learn from and implement right away. We can have actually unarmed, we have a significant kind of force of unarmed responders now in the city between GRID, between unarmed crisis response, between Circle, who could actually also be deployed in a similar way to respond to protests, that they are people who are there to de-escalate and to make sure that people are safe during protests. We could have them as our kind of first line of response here. Again, something that has come forward from the council but hasn't been acted on by the LAPD. And I think there's easy pathways for us to do better, and I've called upon LAPD to do better, and if I'm mayor, I will ensure that they do better and that they're held accountable for for making sure that people are safe when they're actually protesting. For Chief McDonnell, I think on this issue and on issues like those related to ICE response itself and his response on whether he would or would not enforce the mask ban, the state mask ban, in many ways I have found his statements to fall short of what Angelenos need at this moment to make them feel safe. And I would replace him and find another police chief who really met this moment with both building trust of Angelenos and delivering on public safety outcomes accountably.
Let me do a few questions from the audience, and let me start first with Cal State LA students, since we are a Cal State LA affiliate. And just for notes, for the recording, they're speaking into that microphone, but that microphone does not project into the room, so just make sure folks can hear you when you speak.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you, Councilmember Iman. Great questions, great conversation. My name is Genesis, and I serve as the Vice President for External Affairs at Cal State LA for ASI. And you did speak about the internal relationship building. And coming from the outside perspective as a college student, how would your administration build or bridge the gap between college students and the younger voters and residents of LA in our civic participation and ensuring that our voices are heard and we also have a direct impact on our local government?
Oh, that's a great question. And I wish I had more kind of college level educational institutions in my district, because we've tried to engage with schools really deeply. Like, I've gone out to schools, I've talked to students, I've engaged with students as much as was possible. But I think the idea of bringing more college students into decision making in the city is really, really important. And also can bring, I think, greater connections and civic pride between young people who I think feel really disconnected from leadership in LA right now. And I think that there's concrete ways in which that could happen. I think one thing that could happen is if there are key issues that are important for college students, whether it's housing costs and affordability, whether it's economic development, whether it is homelessness. And I know there's a lot of people who are in community colleges and colleges, even at UCLA, who don't have a home to go to at night. I think having the city actually go out to college campuses and engage directly with students on those issues in concrete and kind of immediate ways is one way in which we could do better. And I would be very excited to make sure that happened both through me directly, but also from staff and from committees in the city that could actually go there and engage directly with students to make sure that we were responding to those issues in ways that actually met the needs of students. I found, for example, in conversations around affordability and around housing, where college students are the ones who are going to be dealing with this, or who are already dealing with it if they're looking for an apartment on campus. They don't come to council to give feedback. They don't come to City Hall to provide their input. And I think it's on us to go out there and invite them to participate in a conversation that matters so much for them, because we don't want you to leave LA once you graduate. We want you to stay in LA, we want you to invest in LA, we want you to thrive in LA. And so I would be very excited to do more of that. But also tell me what we can do better.
I would bet that Cal State LA probably has more native Angelenos enrolled as students than any other campus in the city or in the area. And I won't speak for our president, but I will. Cal State LA would love to partner with the mayor's office on doing more to engage college students. Julie had a question in the back.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Julie Hernandez. I'm the outreach coordinator for the Pat Brown Institute. I'm a very recent alumni from Cal State LA. And one question that I had was, I had actually been following the Charter Reform Commission, and there are a lot of recommendations that came out. I'm not asking for a spoiler, but I obviously have to ask, very important and recommendations that are going to get a lot of publicity, obviously, are council overseeing LAPD,
Mhm.
that, and another is the expansion of council seats. And, I want to kind of get your perspective as a council member, on, obviously you haven't gotten to deliberating this, but I do want to know your perspective or initial reaction to some of these recommendations.
Yeah, so I am in favor of both and have been actually one of the more consistent voices on council expansion since my first campaign, talking about how council seats were too big. 260,000 constituents is bigger than most cities in America, and that more council members and smaller districts would be more representative of the diversity of Los Angeles than what we have today, and would allow for residents to engage with their council offices much better. So I'm excited about that. I also think making changes to ensure that oversight over LAPD is not limited to the police commission and to the mayor's office is really important. And I would be very supportive of changes that kind of allowed for greater oversight from elected officials and the council specifically over kind of procedures at LAPD.
Nicola?
Okay, thank you. Is that good? Thank you. I'm Nicola Allenkin. I'm an instructor, faculty member over 26 years at Cal State LA. I also teach a course on the unhoused in society for the last 20 years. So I'd be happy to start the bureau job on Monday.
We're recruiting, I think. Maybe if they
I'll
put
reach out.
the job description out.
I'm a clinical social worker as well, working in Skid Row,
Yeah.
New York City, many other places. So a lot of themes that you mentioned today, which are really important, and the students are describing kind of what the leadership, the city on behalf of the city, and what kinds of leadership the city can demonstrate. I kind of see the city and folks that work, elected officials that work in the city, as a divorced couple that lives in the same house with their boyfriend and girlfriend. So you're going to go use the restroom, and your ex-wife is to your left, and your new girlfriend is to your right.
Oh my goodness.
So it's a very acrimonious relationship, right? There's a lot of conflict and complexity.
Between the city and county? No, between the...
Just among the city folks.
City
Let's not
folks.
include the county yet. So my question is around the themes that you mentioned. And Mr. Bonin said it very well earlier with his expression about the $500,000, whatever the amount was. We have a lot of local power. We have a lot of local expertise. And the things that my students really ask for is, I really have a solution for fill in the blank. How am I able to connect to elected and appointed folks? There was a similar question, and I'll take it to the next level. How do we partner, and how do we gather the constituent strengths so that a lot of the promises that we hear aren't just promises? And everyone, because everyone here is actively in love with the city of LA, otherwise we'd move out 10 years ago. So how do we gather that constituent support? Those are the things that I teach in my course, and we have a lot of really great simple solutions. You mentioned shelter care, for example. How do we get expertise to really be able to speak to people, whoever is in office, and to have that channel, besides just coming onto campus? There seems to be kind of a disconnect between the power base and how we can be involved in really giving direct solutions. So that's my question.
Yeah. So let me start by acknowledging that right now, our forums for public engagement are not working, right? So we have city council comment, we have committee comment, we have neighborhood councils. which were designed to bring neighborhood issues up to the council, but now I think serve almost to suppress them and to prevent participation just because of the nature of their structure. We are not doing a good job of engaging the public right now. And it's hard to answer that question of how we do a better job of engaging with the public at a general scale, but let me talk about it on a specific scale. So for things that are important to particular neighborhoods, like a streetscape improvement or an intervention like adding street safety improvements, sometimes what we've done is just impose those changes top down, and that's bad. Sometimes what we've done is to community input every intervention to death, and so that's not good. And so what we've done in my office, which I'm really excited about, is to talk about interventions in a particular street that can lead to greater safety for pedestrians and cyclists and non-automobile users while still allowing for the free flow of traffic, and to say, how do you want this intervention to be implemented? And to engage on every single public discussion around that issue with that question as the root of it. So allowing for people to actually shape a public investment and to know with certainty that it's going to happen, rather than to impose it unilaterally or to delay it into eternity. And I think you could follow that approach for a lot of issues. So for example, on responses to homelessness, I think we could think about how we redesign responses and also go to both shelters and to the neighborhoods around shelters, and to say, how can we make this work better for you? There is going to be a shelter here. What would it take to get you to welcome this shelter? And residents of the shelter, what would it take to make living here be positive for you? And I think going into public engagement with that perspective, those kinds of questions, I think can elicit a more active and empowered response from constituents that they will then see implemented right in front of them, and that they will have the opportunity to continue engaging with through implementation. So I think changing the way in which we think about public participation to actually engage in implementation and the shaping of implementation, I think is one way in which we can really empower residents to engage in ways that feel fruitful for them.
I got to ask about the Olympics. I forgot to do that earlier. They're coming in 2 years. Yes. Donald Trump is president.
Yeah.
Just even without Trump, are we ready for the Olympics?
Yeah.
And with Trump,
yeah.
Can we have an Olympics that is not a negative experience for LA?
Yeah, I think that will require, that latter question is going to require a lot of engagement. And I think it requires active engagement with the federal administration in partnership with LA 28, which seems to have deep connections with the federal administration. I think we have to use every power that we have locally to engage with the federal administration to make sure that the Olympics happening here does not harm Angelenos. And I don't think we've done that yet.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen that proactive engagement with the Trump administration has yielded better results for some other cities. In San Francisco, the mayor was able to stop federal intervention with a lot of ICE agents because of that engagement. New York City was able to do the same thing. We should be doing the same thing in advance of what is essentially an invitation to federal law enforcement to come and set up over that period. How does that engagement result in a games that is safe for Angelenos, that is safe for a community that has such a significant population of immigrants? How are we going to ask those questions and get them answered in a way that really satisfies us? I think that would be a focus of my work. That would be something that I would be messaging to the public every day if I'm mayor, that these Olympics will happen in a way that is safe for you, and I will guarantee that. And I would be working every day to engage proactively with the Trump administration, using every tool that we have to ensure that the games are happening safely here in LA. And But I think there's other dangers as well that worry me about the Olympics. We don't have right now a sense of, we were supposed to get I believe a capital improvement plan just for the Olympics, of figuring out how much the city would need to invest. Last year, I think it was supposed to be delivered in February. It's now March, we still don't have it. How much is it going to cost us to get ready for the Olympics?
Right.
We don't know that right now. That's a problem. I think we should have known that a long time ago. The fact that we still don't know that worries me.
Time is running out.
Time is running out, right? And by the way, after we figure out how much it costs, we still have to do it.
Right.
So I really feel an urgency around getting those answers, and I would be very focused on both getting those answers and implementing improvements in ways that had long-term benefits for the city and that made sure that we were prepared. The second is a question of how much is it going to cost us to have the Olympics here, and how much of an impact is going to be felt on Angelenos for our budget as we move forward. The games agreement, which is long negotiated before I got there, said that if we go over a certain budget, that we're on the hook for the first, I believe, 275 million. Then the state is on the hook for the next 275 million, and then we're on the hook for anything that comes above that. That is potentially a lot of money that we are on the hook for games that often go over budget.
Yeah.
Almost as a rule, they go over budget. So what are we doing to prevent this games from going over budget? How are we making sure that LA 28's spending and budgeting and fundraising is going well enough that we will not have to bear the costs? Again, that will require significant, I think, mayoral engagement, something I'm very committed to doing if I'm mayor. But I think it is absolutely essential. I talked about a lot of budget limitations that we have already. This could be another devastating budget limitation that we have unless we act now. Because this is not a heavy stadium building games, because this is not a games where we have to put in a lot of new infrastructure, which often bedevils other cities that are preparing for these games. I think there's a pathway to making sure that these games happen in the best way possible for Angelenos. I am not convinced that we are on track to do that right now. And I would be very, very focused on making sure that we are.
Our time's almost up.
Yes.
I have not yet asked you about immigration. You are an immigrant.
Yes.
You were one of the sponsors, I believe, of the city's Sanctuary City Ordinance.
Yes.
What is the city not doing that it should be doing to stand up for our immigrant neighbors?
Yeah, I think there is a lot that I think the city has stood up in many ways. Yes, I was the primary author of our Sanctuary City Ordinance. I think we need to be auditing that ordinance. We have made a commitment to Angelenos that we will not use city resources for immigration enforcement. Yet, we've seen instances where it looks like LAPD is assisting with immigration enforcement, right? We have seen that. What is happening there? What are the answers for those instances? How do we restore trust in our local law enforcement? Or if the trust has been betrayed, how do we make sure that we're actually addressing it? I think auditing how we have actually followed our Sanctuary City Ordinance is extremely important at this time. Another big question that I have is around data sharing.
Yeah.
We are now using, that's part of the ordinance, by the way. It's written into the ordinance that we're not supposed to be sharing data with the federal administration that can be used for immigration enforcement. What about all these license plate cameras? What about the kind of the very many technological interventions that we have now in the city that is being used by LAPD? Are we ensuring that those are not actually being shared with the federal administration? Where are those guardrails? I think an audit is incredibly important to make sure that we're not doing it and to reassure the public that we are not actually collaborating with a hostile and I think horrific federal immigration enforcement policy that's in place. And I think it's important that we do that now, because between kind of those instances that we've seen of LAPD and ICE kind of being in the same place and LAPD responses to protests, I think that there is a real crisis of trust with our law enforcement at this time, particularly around immigration issues. And we have to restore it. This is a city of immigrants. I am an immigrant. This is a city that thrives because immigrants are here. How do we make people feel welcome here and safe here is essential to how we function as a city going forward. And I think it is absolutely, absolutely important. I think there's also one other thing that I do want to say is that we have a lot of power through our city attorney to push back against immigration enforcement and illegal actions by immigration enforcement. Is ICE following the law? Doesn't feel like it.
Yeah.
How can we be suing federal law enforcement on these cases? Are we actually taking proactive action on that? We have not done that as much as other cities have. And by the way, when other cities have sued, they have won. They have won cases and protected their residents. We need to be a lot more proactive. And I understand the city attorney is another elected official, but the mayor has significant authority to push the city attorney to be proactive in taking action on these cases. We should be suing ICE when they're not following the law, and we're not doing that.
Final question, and it's more of a reflective one.
Yeah.
We're living in really, really difficult times.
Yeah.
Immigration raids, bad economy, democratic institutions are faltering. A lot of people are feeling cynical or dispirited. Others are turning out and are demonstrating an energy and are continuing to protest. But a lot of people are losing faith. Where, as a person, as a public leader, do you draw strength and faith?
Oh, that's a great question. And people are feeling cynical. I will say, as someone who's experiencing all of this right now, as someone who is part of some of our political power structures, I understand why people are feeling cynical. I completely understand it. It does not feel like our institutions are caring for our people. And in the case of the federal administration, is actively hostile to our people. And that's awful. It's an awful feeling. I have been really inspired by the people of the city. I watched people come together after the fires with so much force that people had to stop donating. We can't accommodate volunteers, we can't accommodate donations. Like, that was the spirit of generosity that Angelenos had. Similarly, after the raids, I feel like Angelenos have stepped up and given back to their neighbors in ways that have put, other institutions to shame, and including the government. And it is really inspiring. And my first run actually was inspired by Angelenos. I started a volunteer group in my neighborhood to help people who were experiencing homelessness. And we used to go out on weekend mornings. We'd had breakfast burritos and hot cups of coffee, and we'd walk from tent to tent in our neighborhood, get to know people, and try and figure out how to connect them to services. And we had so many volunteers showing up that we had to turn people away. Because in response to a crisis on the streets, Angelenos wanted to respond to that crisis with compassion and with care and with their own work. That is the city that I want to honor with my own work. That's a city that I've hoped that I have honored with the work that I've done on city council. And that's the city that I would want to honor if I'm elected mayor. It is an incredible place. I feel so privileged to be able to represent it right now. And I feel really humbled by the enormity of the trust and care that Angelenos have placed in each other. And I do think that requires more work from the city to honor that.
Councilwoman Nithya Raman, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike.
And we have a parting gift for you, a small token to remind you of your
See what it is.
new partnership between the City of Los Angeles and the official.
Yes. Look at this. Beautiful.
Thank you so much.